What does it mean to be called crazy in a crazy world? Listen to Madness Radio, Voices and Visions from Outside Mental Health, an affiliate of Mad in America Radio, broadcasting on KBOO in Oregon, sponsored by Portland Hearing Voices and the Icarus Project, and syndicated on the Pacifica Network. Madness Radio is online at kboo.fm/madnessradio and at madinamerica.com.
It's a bike show, and a bike show about bikes and also mental health and building community. So that's the topic today. Is there anything that you'd like to just say before we get started and like jump into it?
I would like to say a prayer to the spirit of all the bicycles that I have ever owned or ridden and thank them for helping my mental health, because I mean, it's wonderful to be on the show and thinking about that connection. Bicycles have been really super important for me throughout my life. And it's been really nice to reflect on that and to appreciate that. And I think there's something very special about the bicycle. And I think that it goes very deep into who we are. People who are bicycle owners and bicycle lovers really kind of get it about bicycling. And so it's great to have the opportunity to talk about that.
Yes. Thanks for even saying that, acknowledging the bicycle. I think we're doing we're in a season of doing some acknowledgement, right? About like, and we're on acknowledgement of our history. But to acknowledge publicly how much a bike means to us, like that's a whole other form of acknowledgement. And just
I mean I grew up in like a lot of people who have who have mental health struggles. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. It's a big scary word. I had a lot of really difficult times in my life, and I grew up like a lot of us who have those struggles in a very chaotic family situation. I don't blame my parents. They have their history from their parents, and it goes all the way back through the generations, right? But one of the things that I did, one of the places that I felt powerful and free as a kid was riding my bike really, really as fast as I could. I had like a Schwinn 5-speed, and I would be like, this is warp factor 3, this is warp factor 4, this is warp factor 5. And bikes have always been a space where I immediately feel more at home, more myself, more empowered. And that's been throughout my life. And I was really inspired. I do a little bit of art, and I was really inspired just by this image. And the image is of just a bicycle. I made this as a drawing, and it's an image of a bicycle sign, just a bicycle. And then the top says, "They told me I have schizophrenia." And then the bottom is, "I told them I have a bicycle." And it's really a clash of meanings, and it's a clash of different stories, because a lot of us are told we're broken, there's something wrong with our brains. You're human, but you're not quite like the rest of us. Just take your medications, keep quiet. My path has been completely different from that. I'm not against medications. I know that the system has helped some people. The system really failed me and really made things really worse for me in a lot of ways. I don't take medications. I'm one of those people you don't hear about, the people with the schizophrenia or bipolar or psychosis diagnosis that don't take medications. And reflecting how I did it, a lot of it was just being able to be in the world, and the bicycle helped me to be out in the world, exercise, connecting with my body, connecting with nature, and also to feel less alienated in cities. Because I think all of us know that, if it's a car, you're walking or on public transit, I've been very privileged to have an able body, and I can ride a bicycle. So to be able to have that kind of like victory over the city that I think a lot of bicyclists feel when you're weaving in and out of traffic, or you hop up on the sidewalk, or you can just pick up the bike and go up the stairs. I mean, that feeling of overcoming that alienation is extremely important to me. And I'm thinking there's an author, Ivan Illich, who's been very influential to me, who wrote some books about appropriate technology and the connection between urban design and technology and the environment. And he really points out that a bicycle is really a very human kind of technology. It's a very forgiving, inviting, welcoming, human level technology. It's not an alienating tool. It's more of a convivial, supportive tool. So I feel very grateful to the bicycles in my life. And if you can't ride a bike, then walk, but do something to get out there. It makes a big difference for mental health.
Yeah, that's a really great entry point. By giving it, we do that personification with animals, right? Like dogs talk, or even the sunshine, the trees, it looks very animated. They have features, facial, they have expression, it's expressive. And the fact that you were able to use your bicycle even to separate like those identities, one that was given for you and one that you took on for yourself. And to use it as a tool to not just for freedom, a sense of freedom, but like you kind of, you have been able to gain some skill set where it's like, yeah, not everyone can bunny hop. Like that's a thing.
Yeah, I don't bunny hop. That's for sure. I ride a Dutch one speed.
Okay.
Actually, years ago I was in Amsterdam and I just fell in love with the upright granny bikes, and which is a real different experience than a mountain bike or something that you're hunched over on. It lifts you up. All of your weight is in your hips. Your shoulders are completely free and open. You can have a conversation with the person that you're riding with. You can look around, and that it's a bit of a conversation starter. You don't see a lot of the Dutch granny bikes around. So I used to live in Portland, which is like serious bike culture. And some of the guys on fixies or like these high tech, like $3,000 bikes would kind of look at me sideways. But every now and then, like, hey, cool bike, that's awesome. And it's sort of an expression of my personality, and also like a bit of a protest, because I have to say there's a capitalist politics of the bicycle industry, because what we need is commuter bicycles. The bicycle should be as common as a fork. We need bicycles. We bike carriers, bike for kids, bike for our groceries. We need bikes to get to and you can't. It's hard to do that on a $2,000 mountain bike. You don't really need all those gears. And so having my my Dutch one speed that I bought for $250 and then paid $100 to the airline to get across on the plane, it really like is a way that I sort of express myself, and I sort of like really invest myself in the bicycle. So there's a certain amount of like, yeah, I'm different and I'm proud when I ride that bike, because you see me going by and other bicycles don't quite look like me. You don't have that upright. So what's going on there? I'm sure a lot of people think I'm weird or different, but that's on you. I am who I am. And it took me a long time to get to that space of being comfortable with difference, because that's a big part of my work in mental health, is saying, look, you hear voices, you go into depressive states, you have anxiety, you have suicidal feelings sometimes. Okay, maybe you're different. Doesn't mean you're less than. Doesn't mean that you should be pushed into the shadows. Because psychiatry also told lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people that we were diseased and we were mentally ill and we were locked in to asylums. We were literally tortured to death because we were different in our sexuality or our gender. And so a big part of my message now is like, no, embrace your difference. I mean, yeah, there's suffering. I want people to overcome suffering, but the way necessarily isn't to get rid of being different. Maybe the way is to embrace being different, but then find friendship and community and a sense of empowerment. So a lot of my work these days is really helping people find each other, find communities like the Hearing Voices movement, find organizations of patient survivors, and talk about our common experiences and not be alone. Because as we know, oppression is about divide and conquer. That's what it's about. So if we can unite and come together, I believe that we can make the world a better place for everybody, no matter what your mind is doing that's different than everybody else.
Right. So in this period of time that you being diagnosed as schizophrenic and launching into the work that you're in right now, what are some changes that you've noticed that, I guess even more recently, changes in mental health? I saw that the Hearing Voices movement has been around for a while, but to even get to the point where there are alternatives that are more accessible to people and not kind of hidden away into, certain groups or whatever, or different parts of the country. What has changed to allow people to be more open to either getting off medication or changing their medication to, have that self-advocacy, say, this is what I need. I want something else.
Exactly. Well, it's a power struggle. It's a political struggle. It's a result of the patients' movement, just like the women's movement. We wouldn't have access to reproductive health care or access to midwives or choices around pregnancy or all the different things that we now have thanks to the women's movement, feminism, women organizing. And so a lot of the protections and changes that are in place, there's not enough but a lot of the protections and changes that have taken place in the mental health system, it's a result of the patients movement. And one of the big changes that I've seen is that this idea of peer support, that when you've been in the system, you learn things, you know what it takes, you know how to survive, you know how to make it through, and then you can support other people. We know this from like AA. When you're struggling with addiction, do you want to go to somebody who's read books about addiction and got a license in addictionology, or do you want to meet somebody who's been through it and get some ideas and some support? Same thing with mental health. So there's a lot of that. There's not enough. We need more alternatives to hospitals. We need more alternatives to diagnosis. We need really community-based options. But it is starting to grow. And the second thing I think that's coming from the Black Lives Matter movement, which is so important, is getting police out of mental health. Mm-hmm. I mean, police should not be I need help in my community. Who should I call? Let me call 911. And they send a guy with a gun who's trained to kill terrorists to my door. It should be, look, let's send peers. Let's send people who've been through it. Actually, people ask me like, Will, what changes would you like to see in the mental health system? Actually, I would like to abolish the mental health system. I mean, I would like to see communities that are healthy enough that we can take care of each other, that we don't need those big institutions. If you look at the history of the asylums and the psychiatric hospitals, it was always about population control. It was always about how to control these difficult people that we don't know what to do with. And then once you lock them up, then you started to say that they were ill and they were different and all this. So what I think fundamentally we need is healthy communities. You know, it's hard to have a healthy community when people are working 60 hours for $8 an hour. You know, it's hard to have a healthy community when you don't have universal health care. It's hard to have a healthy community when you don't have childcare or you don't have access to education. So the one thing that people forget about, and this is so important from the disability rights movement, is that when the people at the margins get freedom and we get changes, it helps everybody. So when the disability rights movement, this is a quick example, was able to say, look, we need, ramps, we need cuts in the curbside to help people in wheelchairs who have access issues to be able to, travel freely in areas. That's helped everybody. That helps bicyclists. It helps people who are who are with shopping carts, people with baby strollers. Yeah. So if the people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar, if we can be freer to express our emotions, to express our needs, to express our sensitivities, guess what? That's going to help everybody, because this is a continuum, folks. The only difference between me and you is that I'm a little bit more extreme on the continuum. We're struggling with the same kinds of issues of loneliness, powerlessness, trauma, poverty, and alienating society. So I have seen a lot of change. There's a lot of encouragement, but change doesn't just happen because you wait. It's because there's movements. So get involved in the movements, be activists. That's crucial.
Were there some suggestions of ways to plug in, or that you find has traction enough where people can jump in and find a place?
Well, I mean, I would hope that it has traction enough. I mean, it's going to be easier to go shopping. I mean, capitalism makes onboarding really easy. It's hard but I would just say be persistent. I mean, there's a whole kind of underground. It really is like a countercultural, like samizdat, dissident literature out there. It's sort of like, the women's movement in the 30s or the gay movement in the 40s. Like, it's out there, but you have to look for it because it hasn't really. But like madinamerica.com is a great resource. The Inner Compass Withdrawal Project is great around medications. The Hearing Voices movement. If you start to Google around and you start to, or use the search engine of your choice to find some resources, you will. There's a lot of resources on my website, which is willhall.net. I created a radio show, Madness Radio, that people can check out. It's 180 interviews. So if you want to get interested, because what I've found, I'll travel around, I do trainings and workshops and things, and I'll talk to people and even strangers, and I tell them what I do, and almost immediately they'll say, I have a brother, or I have a friend, or some coworker. And so this is an issue that affects all of us. And like I said, I'm not anti-medication, but we're pushing way too much medication. And there are alternatives to medication. Sometimes people get locked into, my brain is broken, I need this drug. Well, actually, medications are just drugs. If you want to use drugs to support you, or tranquilizers or whatever it is, that's your choice. But it's not like they're treating diseases. They're just drugs. And there may be alternatives, just like we know with other drugs that people use. There are alternatives for maybe achieving some of the same kinds of usefulness. So yeah, I would just encourage people to be persistent. The Hearing Voices movement is a great place to start.
Yeah. That is like that's some great suggestions. And just thinking about, you mentioned that no one's isolated, that we're in this all together.
Mm-hmm.
And being on a continuum of quote unquote mental health or mental wellness or well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So those who are like directly affected, and then will people who are like family members be considered
Mm-hmm.
allies? Like how
Mm-hmm.
can folks who are not directly experiencing, certain experiences be supportive? Like what are some ways to like move and lean into that with a friend, a neighbor, a sibling, or a parent?
Yeah. That's a really great question. Well, I think we have to remember that we're all on a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
So even if someone has an extreme experience, like they feel suicidal or they've got a persecutory voice, that's not very far from your experience of feeling despair or like you want to give up or you're afraid or mistrustful. So one of the first things that I'm encouraging people to do if they want to be an ally, they want to be a supporter, is to open up about your own personal experience and, kind of like step into that vulnerable space first. Like, hey, I did have some addiction issues. Like, there was a time when I was feeling suicidal, so that you're not like one up, one down with the person. You're like, hey, we're in this together and we're going to try and help solve these things together. And the other thing I have to say is that family members are also getting really oppressed by the mental health system, because what happens is that we don't have the safety net, we don't have the supports, and so it lands on the backs of the family, and they become the case manager, and they become the hospital of last resort, or they become the support people. And so when I think about how do we respond to a mental health crisis, it's about the person who's at the center of the crisis, but all the people who are connected to them as well, because they're going to be stressed out, they're going to be overwhelmed. I think that if we have someone in our life that we really wish they would change, but they can't, remember, that's a common human experience. You want that person, like, oh no, why are you going back to that abusive boyfriend again? Or, oh no, why are you gambling away your paycheck again? There's always that person in your life. And so if we can focus on ourselves instead, how can I change? How can I show this person more unconditional love rather than pressure and power struggle to change? That can be a really important way of helping the person. Having good boundaries too, like just because you have a bipolar diagnosis or schizophrenia diagnosis means that you have to let the person walk over you. You like have to have healthy boundaries. I mean, I don't know if I like that term, healthy boundaries, but you have to have like some sense of like, there's two of us in this boat together, and I have needs and you have needs too. And I can't just walk on eggshells and sacrifice for the other person. But it's a great question, because the main thing is we don't talk about this as a community. We leave it to the experts. Like every single time I see an article on the internet about suicide, it says, call the suicide hotline, get treatment. Like, come on, what about talking with each other? What about turning to your community? Because when you go to the experts for treatment, it's more than likely going to be medications. And a lot of times that you start going down a road, and then pretty soon you're like, I want to get off the medications, but I can't. Or, I what are the alternatives? I don't have them, or the medications are causing really serious side effects, and all they want to do is give me more medications. So again, it comes back to healthy communities. That's the key for me.
Mm-hmm. I think, you listed a number of social movements that we've had, from gender to race to ability, ableism, and that idea of abolition is kind of, going back to the bike and just that sense of freedom and being able to rise above, and it's not even a rising above, it's almost like moving to maybe where we really truly are meant to be, and like that sense of freedom and not being oppressed. Like, I know when I am on a bike, I feel better mentally, emotionally, physically. I rode my bike probably twice this weekend. Oh my God. Like that changed everything.
Totally.
It just lifted me up. I mean, and just having this conversation with you, like I emailed to you, I have a brother who's bipolar, and, it's like, there's also an extreme loss, like, he experiences a lot of loss around that. And so like that weight is kind of it's heavy. Like, so what, it's almost like how to, not only for us to be free, but for him to be free too. And to accept that, like, it's not a limit. He's not limited. His life is also broad. It could be broadened in a different way. But I'm wondering, like, when did you, was it just as a child, like you kind of had this like internal strength to like see yourself differently? Like what, what was that change in your life? I mean, was it a bicycle ride? You know, was this like,
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, just thinking about bicycles, wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where when you're depressed, you get a prescription to ride a bicycle, or a prescription to walk or go to the gym, but it's a really big question. I mean, it took me many years. I was on disability for 15 years. You know, I struggled a lot. And looking back on that, it was friendship. It was finding the patient survivor movement where I could be among people that I didn't feel like I was outside. I felt like I was inside. I wasn't pushed to the margins. I think the issue isn't that people are different or weird or they're hearing voices or they're paranoid. I think the issue is that we're isolated. We're disconnected. And so little acts of connection over and over and over again. And that's one of the things that's wonderful about the Hearing Voices movement. You know, people who hear an aggressive voice that nobody else is hearing, you're like, that is terrifying. It's frightening. You know, you don't even know what to do with that. But then you go to a group and there's 12 other people saying, yeah, I've heard voices and that was years ago. And here's what I did. You know, I haven't been in the hospital for a long time. Maybe I don't even take medications. But if we separate people and isolate them and put them in the shadows, then we don't have a chance to connect with each other and learn from each other, because, you know, people have really learned a lot of pathways through something like bipolar or something like schizophrenia or extreme depression or suicidal feelings. And there's a lot of knowledge out there, but we're so focused on the experts that we're not building the communities. I mean, what if every community had places and centers to go that people could connect with each other? I mean, there's so many different things too. I mean, sometimes it is as simple as like, wow, I left my house. My house had really bad mold. And that's why I was so anxious and depressed. And sometimes it does have but often it's much, much more complicated. You know, I'm a big believer in like trying lots of different things. And so for your brother or for anyone, I would love if they just had like some supporters saying, hey, let's try this, let's try that. Let's try more connection with your family. Let's try taking a break from your family. Let's try some nutrition changes. Like, I have to say, like with so-called manic crisis, that's one of the main reasons that people get a bipolar diagnosis. Sleep is a huge issue. So I work with a lot of people around like how to regulate your sleep. Like your friends are staying up till 2 a.m. playing video games. You can't do that. You got to get to sleep, and people have to learn trial and error, experiment. And what if we had a society where we were not tolerating, 26-hour shifts for the nursing profession, and we weren't tolerating, crunch time at the software place where people are up at 4 a.m. What if we had more of a realization that, look, we have to be sensitive that some people are going to be more vulnerable to sleep deprivation than others. We had like an educational approach in the society. What if we had a society where people were encouraged to talk to each other and to not like refer to an expert if they have difficulties? It used to be like the mental health education, like you would see posters that said, is your coworker struggling with mental health issues? Get them help. Connect them with this treatment service. And, that might be help for some people, but mostly just having the confidence to say, hey, let's talk. And what you're going through is probably no different than what I've been through, maybe more extreme right now. But we have a human capacity to connect with each other through the power of listening. Yeah. And if we believe in it, I think we should teach listening skills in high school. We should teach, parents how to listen to their kids and how to support their kids. And we have to realize also that the solution is not just treating trauma, because I believe we need new treatments for trauma, and there's psychedelics coming out, and there's all kinds of different things that are coming for trauma. We need to get serious about preventing trauma in the first place, and seeing the connection between poverty and racism and trauma, and the incredible pressure we put on families because of the economic situation. We could deal with a lot of domestic violence if women just simply had a guaranteed safety net, that they wouldn't be afraid of relying on their husband or their boyfriend for economics. If they could just be free to go get their own place or move out, that would really help a lot
A guaranteed income. I mean,
guaranteed base. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you have a lot of suggestions and ideas, which I feel like there's a crowd as an audience or a choir that's growing around ideas such as these.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, being someone who is solution oriented and not just complaining, like, how are you inspiring people? You have a radio show, you do trainings, but in your day-to-day life, like, how would you say that you're inspiring people to think differently and to see themselves differently, see the world and then other possibilities?
Yeah. Well, as long as the person isn't going to start, really having some kind of discriminatory or frightened or hostile attitude towards me, which I can feel out pretty quickly. I try and disclose about my personal experience. I try and talk about the fact that I was diagnosed, that I hear voices, that I still hear voices. I still go through suicidal feelings sometimes. I don't take medications. And so I'm creating these little conversations all the time that I hope are going to kind of sort of spread out. And I think that's one of the main things we can do, because anytime there's a taboo, if you can just break the taboo by being the first person who steps out and starts to talk about it, I think it really makes a big difference. And so for people to have the courage to do that and to make that, and I have to say the Black Lives Matter movement has done an incredible job of raising the issue of coercive treatment, because we know that the police are responding to mental health calls and then killing people or beating them or escalating or worsening the situation. And we also know that a lot of folks that just end up locked up in the hospital, it's not much different than being locked up in jail. And Black Lives Matter has been making those connections in a very strong way. And so that, I think, is what gives me hope for the future, because when people start to say, well, what would it be like to rely less on police or not rely on police at all? It's not about defund the community. It's a defund the police, but increase the funds to the community, more resources. And then people say, well, what resources? And they say, well, let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about, because we live in a society that's based on isolation and fear and competition and selfishness. And until we break that, until we have a society that's based on mutual aid and healthy communities and caring for each other, and everyone has their guaranteed basic human rights, we're not going to solve mental health problems. It's totally connected with this larger issue of neoliberal capitalism and how to create some kind of democratic socialism, or whatever you want to call it, some kind of alternative society. So I'm very inspired by Black Lives Matter and the Bernie campaign and young people who are really thinking big about how do we actually solve these problems, rather than just like be activists forever and try and raise money to protest. We got to really come up with some solutions.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you started out talking about capitalism, and I'm going to misquote Bell Hooks here, but she is pluralistic, capitalistic patriarchy, and there's another descriptor that I'm missing. But like, if we're getting to the root of what makes our communities unhealthy, like that's going to be it. And that tendency to put us in warehouses, even the educational system is a warehouse, hospitals is another warehouse.
Totally.
I mean, the other two big ones, mental health facilities, and then prisons. I mean, to like put people away out of sight, and like who's left to be walking around? Maybe it's the owners, right? Like people who are making the profit from this, and those are the ones who have like the best lifestyle. So I mean, like, kind of stretching to think and reimagine or imagine ourselves as free, like that we can, even church sometimes, like these institutions have not given us that sense of freedom, but that we can regulate ourselves enough to create those bonded relationships and building connections and listening, respecting, loving, expressing vulnerability and, like tenderness. That's something that is, it's not even on social media sometimes, or it seems like it's fake on social media.
Yeah.
You don't know really what's going on there, or it's all a joke. So, I mean, it's like, I think you said so much that is really in there, and it's so good. And just going back to basic of healthy communities and what makes our lives.
Cheap, excellent commuter bicycles available for everybody, And I talk about my mom a lot. She was involved 40 years ago in helping organize a rape crisis center and shelter in Sarasota, Florida, which is still around. So she really taught me about activism. And that was one of the brilliance of the women's movement, is that women got together in these consciousness raising groups, and they talked about their intimate personal lives with their husbands, with their boyfriends, with their fathers, with their bosses at work. And they talked about these personal experiences, and then they connected it with the larger structural social problems of patriarchy and capitalism and racism. And that's what I see happens every time I sit down with someone to talk about their mental health issues. Wow, issues of toxic masculinity come in, issues of racism and separation and the way in which racism still persists and the segregation is right there. Poverty issues are right there. Homeless issues are right there. And then as the experts come in, they say, no, we don't want to talk about that. We just want to talk about treating the disease of your brain. Well, wait a second. I'm connected to the whole society here. If you really want to build healthy mental health, you have to build a healthy community, and we have to overcome this legacy of racist capitalism that we're still living inside of. And unfortunately, there's a lot of liberal, nonprofit charities that sort of say, oh, gay politics is about being able to get married. Well, no, gay politics is also about a living wage, because a lot of people who are making not very much money are LGBT folks as well. They need labor unions as well. People getting housing is going to affect LGBT folks as well. So if we silo things, if we just warehouse the issues into these separate, then we miss the commonalities. It becomes another divide and conquer. And I really wish people would understand that mental health is for everybody, and we all benefit when we talk about it. And when we talk about abolishing the mental health system, we're talking about creating a society that all of us are going to feel happier and freer and live more fulfilled lives. And that's when we start to talk about really making big changes in the society, which is what I think we have to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a couple of pieces that you mentioned there, which is realizing that we're not separate, the bubbles that we manufacture for ourselves are false. It's not a reality.
Right.
And I live in a city where a lot of cities right now are having an quote unquote uptick in crime, but they're addressing it by policing or talking about crime versus really bringing some real solutions.
Yeah.
And it's just everything is interconnected, and there's this seemingly a human tendency to be I want to be better than the other person beside me, so I am going to, it's this self elevation that is just not necessary, and it's not helping any of us to overcome what we saw in 2020. Gave us a real good lesson, and even a playbook of how to build mutual aid systems.
So totally.
How to create a new pathway. We do that on a bicycle, you're new to town or you're traveling, you go this way and then you come back another way and you go out again a different direction, just to explore, to engage something new internally as well as externally. So trying to, like you said, trying something different, that alternative could just be creating a new route and being open to the conversations that you have along that way, be it with the butterflies or be it with the person who's on the sidewalk. It's it's all engagement. So just opening.
It was amazing that, the pandemic really showed us some hopefulness. First of all, the willingness of people to make a sacrifice, people just stopped, they sacrificed economically, and also the incredible concern and mutual aid. Think what society would be like if we all had the time and the freedom, if we had guaranteed income or we had decent enough jobs, we didn't have to work as much as we do. We had all this free time that we could actually meet our neighbors. We could meet the neighborhood. We could be involved in the community. We often just don't have that simple resource of time availability. And that's often all people need. It's just someone to sit with them and to be with them. I remember a woman that I was doing a training, and she had worked in a clinic, and she said, well, Will, we did have a guy we had to lock up he came into the clinic and we had to lock him up because he was suicidal. And I said, well, okay, did you ask him if he wanted to go to the hospital? No, we had to lock him up. We had to force him into the hospital. Well, did you ask him? We said, yeah, we asked him. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, he couldn't really make up his mind whether he wanted to go voluntarily. And then the clinic had to close at 5:00. And that's why they had to lock him up. And I understand that because I was locked up. I was put in restraints. And a lot of it's just these simple bureaucratic lack of resources. And it's not a lack of resources. It's where the resources are distributed. They're at the top of the economy. They're in the billionaire 1% class being invested in hedge funds and speculative gambling capitalism. But this is the richest country in human history. We can afford basic needs and we can start building basic needs globally. And we can do it, but not unless we ask for it and demand it politically, which is, I hope that people would start to see the mental health dimension part of that larger social struggle that needs to happen. And I'm not identifying as socialism, anarchism, whatever, green, whatever. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. But something has got to change fundamentally. It absolutely has. And maybe it's a totally new language. Maybe it's a completely different vision that comes forward.
I think I was thinking earlier when you were speaking about language, and even just how having even the terms of what, say, this what disease, disorders, what experience is called, that has changed over, the past 100 years.
Yeah.
Like having language to even be able to access and even define really what we're feeling, from malaise to euphoria, like whatever those feelings are, but even to be able to identify. I have a feelings chart, and I sit with a feelings chart sometimes to really understand how I'm feeling, because we're never really asked, how do you feel?
That's right.
Maybe how you doing, but is the person listening on the other side?
Right.
So to identify emotions, to identify what we see in others, how it's being reflected back, language is a big key.
Beautiful.
To having an imagination and to see something different in the possibilities.
That's an excellent point, because we are so quick, because we're afraid. So we're so quick to say depression, or we're so quick to say anxiety, or we're so quick to say schizophrenia or hearing voices. Actually, if you explore those experiences, everybody has a different, one person's so-called depression is so different. Then is it grief? Is it frustration? Is it numbness? Is it being checked out? Is it is it a sense of dissociation? What actually is going on? Anxiety, you're afraid. What are you afraid of? Is it a body reaction? Are you worried? Do you have an inner critic that's beating up on you? And then, schizophrenia is just this umbrella that's been thrown on so many different kinds of experiences. And, they literally will use, are you hearing voices as a checkbox? If you're hearing voices, boom, you're psychotic, time for meds, time for the hospital. What about all the people in history that have heard positive voices? It can be a gift for musicians, poets. It's anybody listening to this. If you want to hear voices, I don't recommend it, but don't sleep for 5 days. You're going to hear some voices. You're going to go into a psychotic. So the way I see it is that what we call madness is a capacity that all of us have that comes out under the right circumstances, the right kinds of stress, the right kinds of trauma, being trapped in a family situation or a confusing situation, or a situation where you're just not heard, or there's mixed messages or something. So to see it differently and to take the time to really explore people, then you start to realize that this person, if I say, oh, they have clinical depression, I don't know what to do. But then you say, oh, they're sad, they're lonely. I have these are just human problems. Oh, this person is hearing voices. What do I do? They're afraid. Just be there to support someone who's afraid. We all know how to do that. Gentleness, listening, an open heart, caring, empowering the person, giving them choices, trying different things, being curious, showing them that you care, being honest with them, being vulnerable, opening up about your own struggles so that they don't feel separate or alien. Just basic human common sense really is what we need. Unfortunately, the mental health system doesn't have a lot of that. It's all pills and disorders and experts.
Yeah, I think that term experts, I think of standardization, everything got standardized, and it's as that has happened and continues to happen even more so, we do lose that, I should know, I know how to cook an egg, technically boil an egg technically, but it is, if I want to do it right, like there's a certain way, it needs to be a certain temperature, it needs to sit in cold water a certain length of time. Like there's this quote unquote
right
science behind every single thing. I'm not saying that science is bad, but just that there's a rigid standard into like, this is the kind of life you want, this is the kind of whatever, everything has a standard, and it makes it difficult if you don't fit the standard. So, I mean, it's going back to a lot of what you've discussed is trying out, seek an alternative, listening to yourself. I mean,
nobody is normal. We're all a variation. Everybody has a variation. Artists and musicians know this really well because they have to take care of their art. They have to take care of their inspiration. They need certain kinds of things, very specific sorts of needs that they have that are unique to them. And so the standardization really comes in with capitalism. It really comes like, how do we process people on this conveyor belt? And if you're unproductive, take you off the conveyor, the conveyor belt and put you in the garbage can. Just separate you out. I was doing a training and someone said, well, we just hired this person who has a psychiatric disability. And they said, well, how do we accommodate them? How are we going to, know what they need for their accommodation? I said, look, get your staff together and talk about how do you accommodate everyone? How does everybody have specific needs? And then she looked at me and says, yeah, I'm going through a pregnancy. I have some specific needs that my coworkers don't need. I have a coworker who's very sensitive to fumes in the office, and they prefer this kind of situation. So if we surface the fact that we're all unique, that nobody is normal, and we all need to be listened to, then it's not, how do we take care of those different people over there? Then it's more like, hey, those different people over there are reminding us that all of us need to be listened to. All of us have unmet needs. All of us have emotions that we don't know how to express.
Mind-blown emoji. That's what I need. I just need a bunch of emojis. That one, and that one.
Yeah, mind-blowing. Yeah.
Because I read a post yesterday and on social, and I reposted it because it was about abolishment in the mental health system, right? And just getting the cups out and that mutual aid support, and just building communities around people versus around the way we build whatever it is that we're building in the capitalism and profit and further development. So this connection from ourselves, and even, people spray their lawn with chemicals, and that's like, another.
Yeah, because their neighbor has a lawn, and they have to look like their neighbor, or the homeowners association. Yeah.
So, I like the ideas that you express around breaking down some of the standards and like finding another reality that can bring about peace.
Because the standard has always been male. It's always been white. It's always been European. I mean, a lot of women I know have different emotional needs connected to their menstrual cycle. That's not really welcomed in society. People are shame or hiding, or, I'm taking mental health, I'm not feeling well today. What if we actually normalize the fact that people have varying emotional states, or that one day you may have one personality, but next day you want to be super, super goofy, or maybe the next day you want to be silent, to really sort of bring that mental diversity in, as I hope we're starting to do. We're starting to have less of an ableism that says one standard. And I mean, the autism movement has done incredible things for this. The anti-racism movement has done incredible things for this, because it's really like a cultural diversity issue in a lot of ways. But we don't want to just have tokenism, or just have everybody in the capitalist workplace. We want to realize that, look, the whole system has to change, because we have to stop oppressing people. That oppression has both economic, political, and also mental health impacts on people. And that's ultimately what people are suffering from, is a lack of empowerment, a lack of true representation, a lack of true involvement, and a lack of true control over their destinies, which is fundamentally what I think liberation movements are all about.
Well, we're going to put a pin in that.
Okay.
Because that was a perfect, sentence. But just to go back to your bicycle, color is your bicycle? And
is black. It's a black bicycle. It does not have a name. But that's an interesting question. Maybe one day it'll tell me its name. I'll find out.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Well, it was really great to meet you. I hope that I see you on a path somewhere.
Yeah.
And that you still have your long hair. Okay, audience, you can't see this, but and I will know who you are.
Yeah.
As a result. So
yeah, maybe on a critical mass bike ride somewhere.
On a critical mass in some city or some country,
or another planet. Who knows what will happen?
Or another planet.
Inside of a dream. Inside of a dream.
That's probably more of a possibility. Yeah, I appreciate it. I think anyone listening to this will find several gems to inspire them to take some action. I know, like, as a person who I think I thrive on authentic connection, I feel like to think about mental health in a different way today helped me to do that, because I was like, I want a liberatory experience when it comes to mental health. Like, I want to find a community where, because I shared with people how I feel, and not a lot of people want to listen. So, like, to be in spaces with people where they know that they are free enough and accepted enough and less judgment, like they can say what they need to say, and I can do the same.
Beautiful.
So I think you gave us like a lot of ways that we can engage each other and ourselves differently. So
awesome. It's such a pleasure to be part of this conversation. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah. Till next time.
Okay, till next time.
You've been listening to Madness Radio, Voices and Visions from Outside Mental Health. Madness Radio host is Will Hall. Producer is Nina Packebush. Madness Radio is an affiliate of Madden America Radio, broadcasting on KBOO in Oregon, sponsored by Portland Hearing Voices and the Icarus Project, and syndicated on the Pacifica Network. Madness Radio is online at kboo.fm/madnessradio and at maddenamerica.com.